This story shows how a grandson threw his grandmother out for being poor, only to discover she owned his entire neighborhood. It is a story about how life, sooner or later, settles all accounts. The morning air in Alara's small house was always thick with the ghosts of yesterday. It smelled of dried herbs, old wood, and the faint, sweet scent of the rose bushes her late husband, Mateo, had planted 40 years ago. At 72, Alara moved with the deliberate slowness of someone who had learned to conserve every ounce of energy. Her hands, gnarled and mapped with the fine lines of a long life of labor, trembled slightly as she measured out flour onto the worn wooden tabletop. Every line on that table told a story. A deep scratch near the edge was from when her son, Leo's father, had carved his initials with a stolen pocket knife as a boy. A dark stain was from a bottle of ink she had spilled while helping him with his homework late one night, and the smooth, almost polished center was where she had kneaded dough for decades, feeding her family through lean years and celebrations alike. Today, she was making Leo's favorite almond cookies. He was coming to visit, her grandson. The thought brought a fragile smile to her face. He was a busy man now, an important man. He had a beautiful wife, Isabella, and a grand house in a new part of the city she had never seen. He didn't visit often. The calls were infrequent, always short, but today he had called. "I'm coming by, Grandma," he had said. "We need to talk." She chose to hear the love in his voice, not the impatience. She chose to believe he missed her, that he wanted to sit at this old table and eat her cookies, just like he did when he was a boy, with scraped knees and a bright, hopeful future. She remembered him sitting right there, his small legs dangling from the chair, telling her he would build her a palace one day. She had laughed and ruffled his hair, her heart swelling with a love so fierce it almost hurt. She slid the tray of cookies into the small, humming oven. The warmth felt good on her tired face. She looked around the little house. It was old, yes. The paint was peeling, and the floorboards creaked with every step. But it was hers. Every object held a memory, a piece of her soul. The faded armchair where Mateo used to read the newspaper. The chipped vase that held flowers from her garden. The framed photograph of her son, lost too young, and his wife, gone soon after. It was just her and Leo left from that branch of the family tree. She had raised him in this very house. When his parents were gone, she had become both mother and father to him. She worked 2 jobs, cleaning houses during the day and sewing clothes for neighbors at night. Her hands, which had once been soft, grew rough and cracked. Her back ached constantly, but she never complained. It was all for Leo, for his education, for his future. She wanted him to have the life she never did, a life free from the constant worry about money. A sleek black car pulled up outside, its modern design looking alien against the backdrop of her modest, aging cottage. It gleamed under the pale morning sun, so polished it seemed to repel the very dust of the old neighborhood. Alara's heart gave a little flutter. He was here. She wiped her hands on her apron and hurried to the door, a smile of pure, unadulterated joy on her face. She pulled it open before he even had a chance to knock. "Leo, my boy." Leo stood on her doorstep, but he was not alone. Beside him stood Isabella, his wife. Leo was dressed in a sharp, tailored suit that probably cost more than Alara earned in 6 months. He looked uncomfortable, his eyes darting around as if ashamed of the peeling paint and the slightly crooked porch step. Isabella, wrapped in a cashmere coat, looked even more out of place. Her lips were pressed into a thin, disapproving line, and her eyes scanned the humble home with a look of undisguised disdain. "Hello, Grandma," Leo said. His voice was flat, devoid of the warmth she had willed herself to hear on the phone. He didn't step forward for a hug. Come in, Alara said, trying to push down the sudden chill that had crept into her heart. "I've made your favorite cookies. They're just coming out of the oven." "We don't have time for that," Isabella said, her voice sharp and brittle. She didn't look at Alara, but at a spot on the wall just over her shoulder. "Leo, just get it over with." Leo winced, but nodded. He finally met his grandmother's gaze, but his own was cold, like a stranger's. "Grandma, we need you to pack a bag." Ilara blinked, confused. "A bag? Are you taking me somewhere? A surprise?" A flicker of hope ignited within her. Maybe they were taking her to their new house for a few days. "Not exactly," Leo said, shifting his weight. He couldn't hold her gaze for long. "Look, there's no easy way to say this. I've sold the house." The words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Ilara felt the smile freeze on her face, then crumble. "Sold the house? But this is our home, Leo. Your home." "It was my home," he corrected her, his tone hardening. "Now it's just an old building on a valuable piece of land. I need the capital for a business venture. It's a big opportunity. But where will I go?" The question came out as a whisper. Her entire world was tilting on its axis. The smell of baking cookies suddenly seemed sickeningly sweet. "We found a place for you," Isabella cut in, pulling a pamphlet from her expensive handbag. "It's a state-run facility, the Golden Years home. It's clean, and they'll make sure you're fed." She said the name as if it were a palace, but her tone suggested it was a place to discard unwanted things. Alara looked from the glossy pamphlet to her grandson's face, searching for a sign that this was all a terrible joke. She saw nothing. No love, no remorse. Only the cold, hard calculation of a businessman closing a deal. As he spoke, her mind flashed back. She was standing in a pawn shop, the city lights blurry through her tears. In her hand was her wedding ring, the simple gold band Matteo had placed on her finger. Leo needed money for his university textbooks, expensive ones for his business degree. She hadn't hesitated. She had slid the ring off her worn finger, the skin underneath pale and naked, and handed it to the pawnbroker. The money she got was just enough. When she gave it to Leo, he had hugged her and promised he would buy her a diamond ring one day to replace it. He never did. "You can't do this, Leo," she pleaded, her voice trembling. "This house is all I have left of your grandfather, of your father." "Don't be sentimental," Leo snapped, his patience finally breaking. "It's a business decision. The new owners want to take possession by the end of the day. So you need to pack. Just the essentials." He stepped past her into the house, his expensive shoes scuffing on the worn floorboards. Isabella remained on the porch, refusing to enter, as if the air inside might contaminate her. Ilara stood frozen in the doorway, the world dissolving into a meaningless blur. The man in her house, pulling a small suitcase from the top of her wardrobe, was not the boy she had raised. He was a stranger, a thief, stealing not just her home, but her entire life, her memories, her very identity. He packed for her a few old dresses, her worn-out Bible, the photograph of her son. He worked with a brutal efficiency, his movements quick and impersonal. He didn't ask her what she wanted to take. He just decided. He zipped the bag shut and placed it by the door. "All right," he said. "Let's go." He didn't let her say goodbye to her home. He guided her firmly by the elbow, his grip feeling more like a guard than a grandson. He led her to the gleaming black car and opened the back door. She slid in, her small, frail body lost in the vast leather seat. It smelled of money and something sterile, like a hospital. As the car pulled away from the curb, she looked back at her little house one last time. The front door was still ajar. A wisp of smoke was beginning to curl from the oven. The cookies were burning. The drive was silent. Rain began to fall, fat, heavy drops that splattered against the windows, blurring the world outside. Ilara watched the familiar streets of her neighborhood slide by, each corner holding a memory she was being torn from. She saw Mrs. Gable's bakery, where she had bought Leo treats as a boy. She saw the park, where he had learned to ride his bike, his triumphant shout echoing in her memory. Leo drove, his eyes fixed on the road ahead. Isabella scrolled through her phone, completely ignoring the old woman weeping silently in the back seat. Ilara's tears were quiet, tracing paths down her wrinkled cheeks. They were not tears of anger, but of a sorrow so profound it felt like a physical weight in her chest. They didn't drive towards the city center, where the state-run home was likely located. Instead, Leo turned onto a series of unfamiliar, increasingly desolate roads. They drove for what felt like an hour, the rain now coming down in a torrential downpour. The sky was a dark, bruised purple. Finally, the car slowed and pulled over to the side of a deserted road. On one side was a dense, dripping forest. On the other, a dilapidated bus stop, its plastic shelter cracked and grimy. There were no houses, no lights, just the relentless drumming of the rain. What are we doing here?" Ilara asked, her voice small and frightened. Leo turned off the engine. He turned around in his seat, his face a mask of strained indifference. "The home. There was a paperwork issue. They don't have a bed for you today." "So, you're taking me back home?" she asked, a desperate sliver of hope returning. "No," he said flatly. "I can't. The sale is final." He got out of the car, walked around to the trunk, and pulled out her small suitcase. He then opened her door. The cold, wet air rushed in, chilling her to the bone. "Get out, Grandma," he said. The cruelty of it was so stark, so unbelievable, that for a moment she couldn't process it. "What?" "Leo, no. It's raining. Where will I go?" "There's a bus," he said, gesturing vaguely down the empty road. "One will come along eventually. You can figure it out." He placed her suitcase on the wet ground beside the bus stop. "Leo, please," she cried, reaching for him. "Don't do this. I'm your grandmother." He flinched away from her touch as if it burned him. "You're an embarrassment," he finally roared, the carefully constructed facade of calm shattering. "A poor old woman living in a shack. I'm building a new life, a better life. I can't have you dragging me down. Isabella's family. They can't know about you." Isabella watched from the passenger seat, her expression unreadable but devoid of any pity. With that, he got back in the car. He didn't look at her again. He started the engine, and the black car pulled away, its red tail lights shrinking into the gray curtain of rain until they vanished completely. Ilara was left standing by the side of the road, the cold rain soaking through her thin coat in seconds. Her suitcase sat in a growing puddle. The sound of the car faded, replaced by the lonely, hollow sound of the storm. She was utterly and completely alone. The rain was merciless. It plastered her thin gray hair to her scalp and streamed down her face, mingling with her tears. Her worn cardigan and dress were soaked through, clinging to her skin like a cold, wet shroud. A deep, shuddering chill began in her bones and spread outwards, making her teeth chatter uncontrollably. She huddled under the flimsy shelter of the bus stop, but the wind drove the rain in sideways, offering little protection. The plastic bench was cold and wet. She sat down, her body trembling, and pulled her small suitcase closer, as if the few meager possessions inside could offer some warmth. They could not. Hours passed. Or maybe it was just minutes. Time seemed to stretch and warp in the gray, desolate twilight. No bus came. Not a single car passed by. The world had forgotten her. Her grandson, the boy she had raised, had erased her from his life as easily as wiping a smudge from a window. The memory of his face, twisted in that final moment of anger, burned in her mind. An embarrassment. The word echoed in her head, each repetition a fresh stab to her heart. All her sacrifices, all her love had amounted to this. She was a liability, a shameful secret to be discarded on a forgotten road. As darkness fell, the cold intensified. Hunger began to gnaw at her stomach, a hollow, aching pain. She hadn't eaten since her small breakfast that morning. The cookies she had baked for Leo were now a black, carbonized mess in the oven of a house that was no longer hers. She had a few coins in the small purse inside her handbag. Not enough for a taxi, even if one were to magically appear, but maybe enough for a phone call. With stiff, frozen fingers, she fumbled inside the bag. Her hand brushed against a familiar object, a thick, yellowish envelope. "Keep this safe, Alara," Matteo had told her years ago, pressing it into her hands. His face had been serious. "Don't open it. Don't even think about it. But if the day ever comes when you are truly desperate, when you have nothing and no one left, this is your last resort. Take it to Arthur." Arthur. Mr. Collins, the lawyer who had been Matteo's friend. She hadn't seen him in years. She didn't even know if he was still alive. At the time, she had dismissed it as one of Matteo's eccentricities. He was a dreamer, always buying bits of seemingly useless land far out of town, convinced they would be worth something one day. She had put the envelope away and forgotten about it, until now. She clutched it in her cold hand. It felt solid, real. A link to a past where she was loved and secure, but it was just paper. It couldn't warm her. It couldn't fill her empty stomach. A wave of dizziness washed over her. She knew she couldn't stay here. The cold would kill her. With a monumental effort, she pushed herself to her feet. Her legs were stiff, and her joints screamed in protest. Picking up her suitcase, which now felt impossibly heavy, she began to walk. She didn't know where she was going. She just followed the road, one foot in front of the other, her body bent against the wind and the rain. She walked for what felt like miles. Each step was an agony. The road eventually led to a dimly lit, industrial part of town. Warehouses and shuttered storefronts loomed like silent, indifferent giants. She found a small alcove between two buildings, a space filled with overflowing dumpsters and the sour smell of garbage. It was out of the direct rain. Exhausted beyond measure, she slumped to the ground, using her suitcase as a pillow, and fell into a fitful, shivering sleep. She woke to the gray light of dawn. Her body was a symphony of pain. Every muscle ached. Every joint was stiff. Her clothes were still damp and cold. For a moment, she was disoriented, thinking she was in her own warm bed. Then the harsh reality crashed down on her. The smell of damp concrete and rotting food filled her nostrils. She was homeless. She had to try to reach Leo again. Maybe he had regretted it. Maybe his conscience had gotten the better of him. It was a foolish hope, but it was all she had. She found a payphone a few blocks away, its receiver dangling by its metal cord. With trembling fingers, she fed her last coins into the slot and dialed the number she knew by heart. It rang once, twice, 3 times. Then a click. The number you have dialed is not in service or has been blocked. He had blocked her. The finality of it was like a door slamming shut in her face. There was no going back. There was no one to call. Desperation gave her a strange, brittle strength. She needed to survive. She walked towards the busier part of the city, her appearance drawing stares. Her clothes were rumpled and stained, her hair a mess. She looked like what she was, a vagrant. She stopped at the back door of a small diner. The smell of bacon and coffee was tantalizing. She knocked meekly. A large man in a grease-stained apron opened the door. "What do you want?" he grunted. "Please, sir," she said, her voice raspy. "I'll do any work. Wash dishes, clean floors, just for a little food." The man looked her up and down, his gaze lingering on her trembling, age-spotted hands. He shook his head. "Sorry, Grandma. You're too old. It's a liability." He closed the door in her face. It was the same everywhere she went. Too old, too frail, no experience. Each rejection was another small death, chipping away at her dignity. The world had no use for an old woman, with nothing to offer but a lifetime of hard work. Driven by a painful, nostalgic impulse, she found her way back to her old neighborhood. She stood across the street from her house, a place that was now alien to her. A large truck from a construction company was parked in the driveway. 2 men were tearing the rose bushes out of the front garden. Mateo's roses. They were tossing the beautiful thorny canes into a pile like trash. A neighbor, Martha, a woman she had known for 30 years, came out of her house next door. She saw Ilara standing there, shivering in her damp clothes. Their eyes met for a moment. Ilara saw a flicker of recognition, then pity, then something else. Fear. Martha quickly looked away, hurried to her car, and drove off without a word. Another neighbor, Mr. Henderson, came out onto his porch. He scowled when he saw her. "What are you doing loitering here?" he called out, his voice sharp with suspicion. "This is a respectable neighborhood. We don't want your kind hanging around. Go on, get out of here before I call the police." Humiliation washed over her, hot and sickening. Her kind. She was no longer Ilara, their neighbor of 40 years. She was a nameless, faceless problem to be shooed away. This was the ultimate degradation, to be cast out not just by her own blood, but by the community she had been a part of for her entire adult life. She turned and walked away, her back straight, though every step felt like it was breaking her heart. She had nowhere to go. She was invisible to the world, a ghost haunting the edges of a life she no longer possessed. As she walked, her hand instinctively went to her bag, her fingers closing around the hard edges of the yellowish envelope. "When you have nothing and no one left," Mateo's voice echoed in her memory. That day had come. The name came back to her. Arthur Collins. The law office had been on Elm Street, a small, unassuming brick building tucked between a bakery and a bookstore. It was a long walk, but she had nothing else. No destination, no purpose, just the faintest glimmer of a dead man's promise. She found the building late in the afternoon. The gold lettering on the window was faded but still legible. Arthur Collins, attorney at law. A light was on inside. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she pushed open the heavy wooden door. A small bell chimed. The office was warm and smelled of old paper, leather, and pipe tobacco. It was a scent from another era. A man sat behind a large oak desk, his back to her. He was old, with a shock of white hair. He turned around, his brow furrowed in concentration. "Can I help you?" he asked, his voice a gentle rumble. Then he looked at her. He truly looked at her. His eyes, magnified by thick glasses, widened in recognition. "Good heavens," he breathed. "Ilara? Ilara Martinez?" Tears welled in Ilara's eyes at the sound of her own name spoken with kindness. She could only nod, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Arthur Collins was on his feet in an instant. He rushed around the desk, his old joints creaking. He took in her damp clothes, her pale face, her trembling hands. He didn't ask questions. He didn't judge. He simply took her gently by the arm. "My dear woman," he said, his voice full of concern, "you look frozen. Come, sit by the radiator. Let me get you some tea." He led her to a comfortable armchair near a hissing radiator that was throwing off a wonderful life-giving heat. He disappeared into a back room and returned a few minutes later with a steaming mug of tea and a plate of biscuits. "Here," he said, placing it in her hands. "Drink this. It will warm you up." Ilara wrapped her frozen fingers around the warm mug. The heat seeped into her skin, a small miracle of comfort. She took a sip. It was hot and sweet. She began to cry, not from sadness this time, but from the overwhelming relief of a simple act of human kindness. Arthur sat in the chair opposite her, waiting patiently until her sobs subsided. "Now," he said gently, "tell me what's happened. Where is Matteo? I haven't seen him in years." "Matteo passed away 10 years ago," she whispered. Arthur's face fell. "Oh, I am so sorry to hear that. He was a good man, a dreamer, but a good man." He paused. "And your boy? I remember Matteo was so proud of him." The mention of Leo brought the pain rushing back. In a halting, broken voice, Ilara told him everything. The sale of the house, the coldness of her grandson, being left on the side of the road in the rain, the rejections, the humiliation. Arthur listened without interruption, his expression growing darker and sadder with every word. When she finished, he was silent for a long time, his fingers steepled under his chin. "That young man," he finally said, his voice tight with anger, "has a debt to pay that has nothing to do with money." He looked at her. "But you, Ilara, we need to take care of you. You can stay in my guest room for as long as you need. It's not much, but it's warm and safe." Then she remembered. "Matteo," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "He told me, if I was ever in trouble, to come to you. He gave me something." She fumbled in her handbag and pulled out the crumpled, yellowish envelope. She handed it to him. Arthur took the envelope, his brow furrowed. He recognized Matteo's handwriting on the front. It simply said, "For Ilara, last resort." He looked at her, and she nodded, giving him permission. With a letter opener from his desk, he carefully slit the envelope open. Inside were several folded documents, brittle with age, and a handwritten letter. He unfolded the letter first and began to read. As he read, his eyebrows climbed higher and higher up his forehead. He let out a low whistle. "Good heavens, Matteo," he muttered to himself. "You old fox. What is it? Ilara asked, leaning forward. Arthur looked up from the letter, his eyes wide. It's a letter from Matteo. He explains everything here. He then turned his attention to the other documents. They were old land deeds, covered in legal descriptions and official-looking stamps. He spread them out on his desk, studying the plots and signatures. I remember this, he said, tapping one of the deeds. Matteo bought up huge parcels of farmland back in the 60s and 70s. Everyone thought he was crazy. It was cheap, undeveloped land, miles from anything. He called it investing in the horizon. He pulled a large, modern zoning map of the county from a drawer and spread it over the old deeds. He began to compare the old plot numbers with the new map, his finger tracing lines and boundaries. Ilara watched, not understanding any of it. She was just grateful to be warm, to be in the presence of a friend. Suddenly, Arthur stopped. He stared at the map, then back at the deed, then back at the map. A slow, incredulous smile spread across his face. Oh, my word, he said, his voice filled with awe. Ilara, I think your life is about to change. He pointed to a large, sprawling area on the modern map. It was a brand new, ultra-modern development, marked with a fancy cursive name, Willow Creek Estates. Do you know this place? He asked her. Ilara shook her head. No. I've heard Leo talk about it. It's where he lives. It's a very wealthy neighborhood. Arthur's smile grew wider. He looked at her, his eyes twinkling. Ilara, he said slowly, according to these deeds, which appear to be perfectly legal and binding, you don't just live near Willow Creek Estates. You own it, all of it. Meanwhile, in a sprawling mansion in the heart of Willow Creek Estates, Leo was hosting a dinner party. The air was filled with the clinking of crystal champagne flutes and the low hum of self-congratulatory conversation. Men in expensive suits and women in designer dresses mingled in his cavernous living room, which featured a floor-to-ceiling glass wall overlooking a meticulously landscaped garden and a glowing infinity pool. Leo stood at the center of it all, a glass of vintage champagne in his hand, his wife Isabella clinging to his arm. He felt a surge of triumph. This was the life he had always wanted, the life he deserved. He had successfully cut the last tie to his pathetic, impoverished past. The money from the sale of his grandmother's hovel was already earmarked for his next big project. He felt no guilt, only relief. "Leo, my boy," a booming voice called out. It was Isabella's father, a gruff, intimidating man named Marcus Thorne, who owned a massive construction empire. "Excellent party, excellent champagne. Only the best for you, Marcus," Leo said with a smooth smile. Marcus clapped him on the shoulder. "I like you, Leo. You've got drive, ambition. You're a self-made man, came from nothing. I respect that." Leo's smile didn't falter. "Thank you, sir. I've always believed you make your own luck. You can't let anything, or anyone, hold you back." "Speaking of which," Marcus said, lowering his voice slightly, "my daughter tells me you had some family business to take care of today. Everything settled?" "All settled," Leo confirmed, taking a sip of champagne. "Just an old property I had to liquidate. A final relic from a past I'm happy to leave behind." "Good. Family can be complicated," Marcus said, nodding. "Especially the poor relations, always showing up with their hands out. Thankfully, our family doesn't have that problem." "Neither do I," Leo lied, his voice a perfect blend of confidence and casual dismissal. "I'm an orphan, as you know. No family to speak of. It's just me and Isabella now. The lie slid off his tongue with practiced ease. He had been telling it for years. It was the foundation upon which his new identity was built. Isabella squeezed his arm, a silent signal of approval. She had been the one to insist he deal with the grandmother problem once and for all. She's a walking embarrassment, she had hissed at him a week ago. If my parents ever found out you came from that squalor, they would never approve of our plans. Their plans were grand. Leo, a junior developer at a large firm, was about to make his big move. His company was in the final stages of acquiring the last large, undeveloped tract of land adjacent to Willow Creek Estates. It was their flagship project, Phase 2, and Leo was slated to lead it. It would make him a major player in the city's real estate scene. It would make him rich beyond his wildest dreams. He felt a thrill of pure, unadulterated power. He had done it. He had clawed his way to the top. He had shed his old skin, discarded the woman who raised him like a piece of garbage, and was now poised on the brink of greatness. Nothing could stop him. The irony, thick and suffocating, was that the very land his entire future depended on, the parcel for Phase 2 of Willow Creek Estates, was the largest plot listed in the dusty, forgotten deeds that his grandmother now held in her possession. His ambition was built on a foundation he had just tried to destroy. He was celebrating his success on stolen land, and he had no idea. Arthur Collins worked through the night. He made calls to old contacts at the county records office, cross-referenced decades-old plat maps, and dug through legal archives. What he uncovered was staggering. Mateo Martinez, the quiet dreamer, had not been a fool. He had been a visionary. The farmland he had purchased for pennies an acre was now the most valuable real estate in the entire region. The developer who had built Willow Creek Estates had done so based on a fraudulent title claim, likely cooked up by a competitor after Mateo's death, assuming the true owner was gone and no heirs would ever surface. The transfer was illegal. The entire subdivision, with its multi-million-dollar homes, manicured lawns, and exclusive country club, had been built on land that, according to the law, still belonged to Mateo's heir. Ilara Martinez was not just the owner. She was, in effect, the landlord to hundreds of the city's wealthiest families, including her own grandson. The next morning, Arthur explained it all to Ilara. He laid it out in simple terms, drawing diagrams on a legal pad. He told her the value of the land was estimated in the hundreds of millions of dollars. He told her she had the right to evict every single person living there. He told her she was one of the wealthiest women in the state. Ilara listened, her face pale. She showed no signs of joy or triumph. There was no gleam of avarice in her eyes. She simply looked overwhelmed and deeply, deeply sad. "All that money," she whispered, her voice trembling. "And all I ever wanted was my little house, my roses." "You can have your house back, Ilara," Arthur said gently. "You can have 1,000 houses like it. But first, we need to correct this injustice. For you. And for Mateo." With Ilara's permission, Arthur filed the official claim. He sent cease and desist orders to Leo's company, Thorn Development, and to every associated bank and investor. The legal bombshell detonated with the force of a nuclear bomb in the city's financial district. Leo was in a board meeting, presenting his grand vision for Phase 2, when his phone began to vibrate violently on the table. It was his company's head of legal. He ignored it. It rang again and again. Finally, with an apologetic smile to the board, he stepped out to take the call. "What is it, David?" he snapped. "I'm in the middle of a presentation. You need to get down to my office right now." David's voice was tight with panic. "The entire Willow Creek project is compromised. All of it. Phase 1 and 2. "What are you talking about?" Leo scoffed. "We have the titles." "Apparently we don't," David said. "A prior claim has been filed. A legitimate one, Leo. From the 1960s. The deeds are ironclad. We're being sued for illegal occupation and development. All our assets on that project have been frozen. The banks are pulling our credit lines as we speak." Leo felt the blood drain from his face. Who? Who filed the claim? There was a pause on the other end of the line. "The claimant," David said slowly, "is a woman by the name of Alara Martinez." The name hit Leo like a physical blow. It couldn't be. It was impossible. A coincidence. It had to be. He stumbled back into the boardroom, his face ashen. His boss, Marcus Thorne, took one look at him and knew something was terribly wrong. The house of cards collapsed with astonishing speed. Within hours, the news was everywhere. Thorne Development stock plummeted. The investors for Phase 2, spooked by the lawsuit, pulled out completely. The massive loan Leo had secured was rescinded. His career, which had seemed so bright and limitless just yesterday, was over. He went home in a daze, his mind reeling. When he walked through the door of his mansion, he found Isabella in the master bedroom, throwing expensive clothes into a set of Louis Vuitton suitcases. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice hollow. She didn't look at him. "I'm leaving you, Leo," she said, her voice cold as ice. "My father just called me. He told me everything, not just about the lawsuit, but about the claimant, about your grandmother." "Isabella, I can fix this," he pleaded. She finally turned to face him, her face a mask of pure fury and disgust. "Fix it? You idiot. You absolute fool. You threw away the woman who owns the very ground we're standing on. You lied to me. You lied to my father. You're not a self-made man. You're just a pathetic, ungrateful boy who threw his own family in the trash." "I did it for us," he yelled. "You did it for you," she screamed back. "And now you have nothing. I'm not going down with you." She zipped the last suitcase shut. "My father's lawyers will be in touch about the divorce. Goodbye, Leo." She walked past him without a backward glance, her heels clicking on the marble floor. A few minutes later, he heard the roar of her sports car's engine as she sped away, leaving him alone in the silent, cavernous house that no longer felt like his. Over the next few days, Leo lost everything. The company fired him. The bank foreclosed on the house. His car was repossessed. His friends, the ones who had toasted his success just days before, stopped answering his calls. He was ruined. A pariah. Alone in a cheap, rented room, with nothing but the clothes on his back, the full weight of his actions finally crashed down on him. He had thrown away everything for a dream of wealth and status, and in a single, brutal stroke of cosmic justice, the very person he had discarded had become the source of it all. There was only one person in the world who could help him now. He had to go to her. He had to beg. Finding her wasn't hard. Arthur Collins, on Alara's behalf, had already bought back her little house from the new owners for a ridiculously high price they couldn't refuse. Leo stood across the street, looking at the home he had sold without a second thought. The peeling paint was gone, replaced with a fresh, clean coat of pale yellow. The broken porch step was repaired, and in the front garden, a team of landscapers was carefully replanting dozens of new rose bushes. The house looked loved again. It looked like a home. He took a deep breath and walked up the familiar path. His hand trembled as he reached up to knock on the door. It felt heavier than it ever had before. The door opened. Ilara stood there. She wasn't wearing her old, frayed cardigan. She was dressed in a simple but elegant wool dress. Her hair was neatly combed. She looked peaceful. There was a quiet dignity about her that he had never seen before. Her eyes, when they met his, were not filled with anger or hatred. They were just calm and a little sad. Leo's composure broke. He fell to his knees on the newly repaired porch. "Grandma," he choked out, tears streaming down his face. "Grandma, I'm so sorry." He was a pathetic sight. His expensive suit was rumpled and stained. He hadn't shaved in days. His face was a mask of desperation and self-pity. "I made a mistake," he sobbed, clutching at the hem of her dress. "A terrible, terrible mistake. I was a fool. I was arrogant. Please, you have to forgive me. I've lost everything. My job, my house. Isabella left me. I have nothing." His words were a torrent of I and me. He spoke of his loss, his pain, his needs. It was an apology born not of remorse for the pain he had caused, but of a desperate, selfish need to fix his own shattered life. Ilara looked down at the weeping man at her feet, the boy she had loved more than life itself. She felt a pang of pity, but it was distant, like an echo from a life she no longer lived. She gently pulled her dress from his grasp and took a step back. "Get up, Leo," she said. Her voice was not harsh. It was quiet, but it held a new strength, a firmness he had never heard before. He stumbled to his feet, looking at her with pleading eyes. "Help me, Grandma. Please. We can be a family again. I'll do anything. I'll make it up to you." Ilara was silent for a long moment. She looked past him at the new rose bushes. Then her gaze returned to his face. "Do you remember?" she began, her voice soft but clear. "The winter you were 10? You had pneumonia. The doctor said you needed expensive medicine. I worked for 30 hours straight, sewing dresses until my fingers bled, just to afford it." Leo flinched. He remembered. "Do you remember," she continued, "when you wanted to go to the university? The tuition was so high. I sold my wedding ring, Leo. The only thing I had left of your grandfather. I gave you the money, and you didn't even ask where it came from." His face paled. He had forgotten that. "I remember every meal I skipped so that you could have a full plate. I remember every night I stayed up, exhausted, to help you with your studies. I remember the pride I felt when you graduated. I thought all my sacrifices were worth it." Her voice remained steady, a calm recitation of facts. "And I remember the rain," she said, her eyes boring into his. "I remember how cold it was. I remember watching your car drive away, leaving me on the side of a road like a piece of trash. You didn't just throw away an old woman that day, Leo. You threw away every meal I ever cooked for you, every tear I ever shed for you, every piece of my heart I ever gave you." She took a breath. "You come here now, asking for forgiveness because you have lost your money and your fine house. You don't ask for forgiveness for my cold nights on the street. You don't ask for forgiveness for my humiliation. You are sorry you got caught, Leo. You are not sorry for what you did." "No," he whispered, shaking his head. "That's not true." But they both knew it was. "I do forgive you," she said, and the words surprised him. I forgive you because I cannot carry that bitterness in my heart. It is too heavy. But forgiveness and trust are two different things. You shattered my trust. You cannot be a part of my life again. But what will I do? He wailed, his voice cracking. I have nothing. Yes, you do, she said, her voice firm. You have your youth. You have your health. You have two hands, just as I did. You told your father-in-law you were a self-made man. Now is your chance to become one. Go and build a life, Leo, but build it on a foundation of truth and hard work this time, not on lies and cruelty. She looked at him one last time, her eyes full of a deep, ancient sorrow. The money, the land, it is not for you. It is for Mateo's memory. It is for all the people like me, who the world has thrown away. With that, she stepped back into her house and gently, but firmly, closed the door. The click of the latch was the sound of a final, irrevocable ending. The final chapter of Alara's life was one of quiet peace. She did not move into a mansion. She stayed in her small, beloved house, surrounded by her blooming roses. With Arthur's guidance, she used her immense wealth not for luxury, but for grace. She established the Mateo and Alara Martinez Foundation. Its first project was to build a beautiful, modern, and compassionate care home for the elderly homeless, ensuring no one else would ever have to suffer the fate she had. She funded scholarships for underprivileged students and built a new wing on the local community hospital. She never evicted the residents of Willow Creek Estates. Instead, she set up a trust that owned the land, and the ground rents they now paid funded her foundation's charitable work. Her name was never on a building, her face never in the paper. She found her joy not in wealth, but in giving it away. Arthur Collins remained her steadfast friend and advisor, often joining her for tea in her sunny garden. She was alone, but she was not lonely. She was at peace, surrounded by the quiet dignity of a life well lived and a legacy of kindness. Leo was never seen in the city again. Rumors occasionally surfaced. Some said he was working as a manual laborer in a distant town. Others said he was spotted washing dishes in the back of a cheap restaurant. One story, whispered among the people who used to know him, told of him being seen on a city street, watching an old woman struggle with her groceries. For a moment, he looked like he might step forward to help, but then, overcome with a shame too deep for words, he simply turned and walked away, a ghost haunted by the life he had thrown away. Because one can rebuild a house of bricks and mortar, but a home built on love, once shattered by betrayal, can never be truly pieced back together. Ingratitude leaves a debt that no amount of money can ever repay, and life, in its own time, always collects.